What if I told you that a former slave, a man who fought for entertainment in the bloody arenas of Rome, once commanded an army of over 100,000 people? That this man, with no formal military training, managed to defeat some of the most battle-hardened legions of the Roman Republic, not once, but repeatedly. For 2 years, this leader and his followers struck fear into the heart of the ancient world's most powerful empire, challenging the very foundations of Roman society. This is not a myth or a legend, but the astonishing true story of Spartacus and the greatest slave rebellion in antiquity. In the shadows of the Colosseum, beyond the marble monuments and military triumphs that we associate with Rome, lies a tale of courage, strategy, and the desperate fight for freedom that would echo through the millennia. The Roman world of Essilavi or Y2. Understand the magnitude of Spartacus's rebellion, we must first comprehend the world in which it took place. By the 1st century BCE, Rome had transformed from a regional power into a vast empire stretching across the Mediterranean. This expansion brought unprecedented wealth to the Roman elite, but it was built on the backs of millions of enslaved people. Slavery wasn't just an aspect of Roman society, it was its foundation. Estimates suggest that slaves comprised between 20 to 40% of Italy's population, numbering in the millions. These men, women, and children were the engines that powered Roman agriculture, its mining, construction, and domestic service. They were considered property under Roman law, with no rights, no families that couldn't be broken apart at an owner's whim, and no hope of freedom except through the unlikely mercy of their masters. The Roman economy had become increasingly dependent on large estates, called latifundia, worked by gangs of enslaved laborers who lived in brutal conditions. Meanwhile, in the cities, wealthy Romans displayed their status through the number of slaves they owned. A wealthy aristocrat might own hundreds, if not thousands, of slaves for every conceivable task, from cooking and cleaning to tutoring their children and managing their finances. But perhaps the most visible and dehumanizing form of slavery was that of the gladiators, men forced to fight to the death for the entertainment of Roman crowds. The man who would be Kion to this world stepped a man who would change history. Who was Spartacus? The historical record is frustratingly sparse, and much of what we know comes from later Roman historians who were hardly sympathetic to his cause. Most sources agree that Spartacus was a Thracian, from the region that today comprises parts of Bulgaria, Greece, and Turkey. Before his enslavement, he may have served as a soldier in the Roman auxiliary forces or possibly fought against Rome. What we do know is that at some point he was captured, sold into slavery, and eventually sent to a gladiatorial school in Capua. Owned by one Lentulus Batitus, gladiators were the elite of the slave world, trained fighters who received better food and treatment than other slaves, but only because they represented a significant investment. Their lives were valued only as long as they could entertain crowds in the arena. It was in this school, surrounded by other battle-hardened men from across the known world, that Spartacus began to formulate a plan that would shake Rome to its core, the spark of RBLL, in the year 73 BCE. The spark was lit. According to the ancient historian Plutarch, about 200 gladiators plotted their escape from the Capua school. When their plan was discovered, roughly 70 men managed to break free, seizing kitchen implements and gladiatorial weapons to fight their way out. Among them was Spartacus, who quickly emerged as the natural leader of this small band of fugitives. What happened next was nothing short of extraordinary. This tiny group of escaped slaves, armed with little more than their wits and determination, managed to defeat a contingent of Roman soldiers sent to recapture them. They seized proper military equipment and began raiding the surrounding countryside, freeing other slaves and recruiting them to their cause. As word of their success spread, their numbers swelled. What began as a desperate escape soon evolved into a full-scale rebellion. The rebel army GROW Spartacus proved to be not just a capable fighter, but a brilliant military strategist and leader. He understood that his ragtag army of former slaves needed discipline, organization, and training to stand against Roman legions. He implemented Roman military tactics, drilling his followers and organizing them into cohesive units. Perhaps most remarkably, he he managed to unite men and women from diverse backgrounds: Gauls, Germans, Thracians, and others who might otherwise have little in common beyond their shared desire for freedom. The rebels established a base on the slopes of Mount Vesuvius, seemingly impregnable position that allowed them to raid the surrounding countryside while defending against Roman attacks. From here, their numbers continued to grow, eventually reaching an estimated 100,000 to 120,000 followers. This was no longer a mere band of escaped slaves, but a formidable fighting force that posed a genuine threat to Roman authority. Rome underestimated the threat. The Senate sent small forces under praetors magistrates with military authority to deal with what they considered a minor disturbance. These commanders, accustomed to fighting organized armies rather than bands of rebels, approached the task with arrogance and complacency. It would soon learn a costly lesson. The first significant Roman force sent against Spartacus was led by praetor Gaius Claudius Glaber. Glaber trapped the rebels on Mount Vesuvius, blocking the only known path down and assuming they would either starve or surrender. But Spartacus and his men devised an ingenious solution. Using vines and ropes woven from local plants, they descended the steep cliffs on the side of the mountain that Glaber had left unguarded. They then launched a surprise attack on the Roman camp, routing Glaber's forces and seizing valuable supplies and weapons. This victory was followed by another against the forces of praetor Publius Farinius, who sent multiple detachments against the rebels, only to have each defeated in detail. Spartacus's army continued to grow, and with each victory, their confidence in Rome's alarm increased. Military genius of Spartacus. What made Spartacus such an effective military leader against the professional soldiers of Rome? Part of his success lay in his understanding of Roman tactics and his ability to adapt them to his own forces' strengths and weaknesses. Unlike the rigid formations of Roman legions, Spartacus employed flexible tactics that capitalized on the mobility and enthusiasm of his fighters. He understood that his army, while large, couldn't match Roman discipline in open battle for extended periods. Instead, he favored ambushes, surprise attacks, and exploiting terrain to neutralize Rome's advantages. He also made excellent use of intelligence, often gathering information from local sympathizers and scouts to stay one step ahead of Roman forces. Perhaps most importantly, Spartacus recognized the importance of morale. He shared the hardships of his followers, fought alongside them in battle, and distributed plunder fairly. This created fierce loyalty and a willingness to follow him into seemingly impossible situations. His men weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for a cause, for freedom, and for the chance to determine their own destinies. The division in the RANKSAs, the rebellion, entered its second year. Critical development occurred that would ultimately seal its fate. According to the Roman historian Appian, a division emerged among the rebel leadership about their ultimate strategy. Spartacus, ever pragmatic, seems to have favored leading his followers north to the Alps, beyond the borders of Roman territory, where they could disperse to their homelands. However, other leaders,
notably
the Gauls, Crixus, and Inamos, advocated for staying in Italy to continue raiding Roman territories and amass more wealth. This disagreement led to a split in the rebel forces, with a significant detachment under Crixus separating from Spartacus's main army. This division would prove fatal, as it allowed Roman forces to defeat the rebels in detail. In the spring of 72 BCE, the consuls Lucius Gellius Publicola and Gnaeus Cornelius Lentulus Clodionus were sent with two large armies to crush the rebellion once and for all. Crixus and his approximately 30,000 followers were cornered and defeated by Gellius's forces near Mount Garganus, with Crixus himself killed in battle. Spartacus, in a gesture that reveals much about his character, is said to have held funeral games in honor of his fallen comrade, forcing 300 Roman prisoners to fight as gladiators in a grim parody of Roman entertainment. The rebels march on Ardh after avenging Crixus's death. Spartacus led his remaining force, his still numbering over 100,000, north toward the Alps. Along the way, they defeated the legions of both consuls in separate engagements, demonstrating, once again, Spartacus's military genius. The rebels had reached the foothills of the Alps, and freedom seemed within reach. But then, in a decision that has puzzled historians for centuries, Spartacus turned his army around and led them back south into Italy. Why did Spartacus make this fateful choice? Ancient sources offer different explanations. Some suggest that his followers, intoxicated by their success and the plunder they had accumulated, refused to leave Italy. Others propose that Spartacus himself may have harbored ambitions of marching on Rome itself, believing his army strong enough to challenge the capital directly. Whatever the reason, his decision would ultimately lead to the rebellion's bloody conclusion. Crassus enters the SDHD by this point. The Roman Senate was in a state of panic. The rebellion had lasted longer than anyone could have imagined and had defeated multiple Roman armies. In a desperate move, they turned to Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of Rome's wealthiest men and a capable, if ruthless, military commander. Crassus was granted extraordinary powers, equivalent to those of a dictator. To deal with the rebel threat, Crassus understood that previous Roman commanders had failed due to overconfidence and an underestimation of the enemy. He approached the task with grim determination, reconstituting defeated legions and implementing harsh discipline. Legend holds that he even revived the ancient practice of decimation, executing 1 in every 10 soldiers of units that had performed poorly to ensure obedience and resolve. Crassus employed a strategy of containment and attrition, gradually hemming in the rebel forces and preventing them from dispersing or resupplying. He constructed fortifications across the Breton Peninsula in southern Italy, effectively trapping Spartacus and his followers. The rebels made several attempts to break through, including one daring winter assault in which they managed to fill in a section of the Roman ditch with earth, corpses, and snow to escape the encirclement. The final BATTL by the spring of 71 BCE, the end was near. Spartacus's forces, diminished by combat losses and desertions, faced Crassus's reinforced legions. In a final, desperate attempt to break free, Spartacus led his remaining followers, now estimated at around 60,000, in a direct assault on the Roman army. The battle that followed was brutal and decisive. Though the rebels fought with the courage of those who knew there was no surrender, they were ultimately overwhelmed by the disciplined Roman legions. According to Plutarch, Spartacus himself was last seen fighting his way toward Crassus, hurling himself into the very midst of the danger. Though his body was never found among the thousands of dead, Crassus's victory was complete but merciless. To serve as a warning to any who might consider rebellion in the future, he ordered the crucifixion of 6,000 captured rebels along the Appian Way, the main road leading to Rome. For miles, the crosses bore their grim testimony to the price of defying Rome. Archaeological evidence, CI 4 centuries. The story of Spartacus was known primarily through the writings of Roman historians, who naturally portrayed the rebellion from their own perspective. But in recent decades, archaeological discoveries have begun to shed new light on this pivotal moment in history. Excavations in southern Italy have uncovered what appear to be rebel camps. It's complete with weapons, coins, and everyday items that tell us more about the composition and organization of Spartacus's forces. Perhaps most intriguing are the findings that suggest the rebels attempted to establish their own form of governance, minting their own coins and creating administrative structures. These discoveries challenge the traditional Roman portrayal of the rebels as mere bandits and suggest a more organized movement with political aspirations in the region around Mount Vesuvius. Archaeologists have found evidence of the kind of improvised weapons and tools the rebels would have used in their early days, as well as traces of the Roman fortifications built to contain them. Each new discovery adds another piece to the puzzle, helping us to reconstruct a more complete picture of this extraordinary episode in ancient history. The socioeconomic impact, the Spartacus rebellion, sent shockwaves through Roman society that would be felt for generations. On the surface, Rome appeared to have crushed the revolt decisively. But the rebellion exposed fundamental vulnerabilities in the Roman system of slavery and the social order it supported in the immediate aftermath. Roman owners became more fearful of their slaves, implementing harsher controls and punishments. The Senate passed legislation restricting the manumission, or freeing of slaves, making it more difficult for owners to liberate even those slaves who had served faithfully for years. The rebellion also contributed to growing tensions between the wealthy elite who owned vast numbers of slaves and the poorer Roman citizens who competed with slave labor for employment. Economically, the rebellion disrupted agricultural production. In large parts of Italy, many latifundia were destroyed during the fighting, and owners became more hesitant to invest in slave labor. This may have contributed to a gradual shift away from the slave-worked estates toward other forms of agricultural organization in the following centuries. Perhaps most importantly, the rebellion forced Romans to confront the moral implications of their reliance on slave labor, while slavery continued to be a fundamental part of Roman society. The memory of Spartacus and the threat he represented never entirely faded, serving as a constant reminder of the human cost of Rome's economic system. Spartacus in literature and Archaeological. Story of Spartacus has captivated imaginations long after the fall of Rome, throughout the centuries. Writers, artists, and thinkers have returned to his story as a symbol of resistance against oppression and the universal human desire for freedom. In the 18th century, the French philosopher Voltaire wrote about Spartacus as a hero who fought against tyranny, while the Haitian revolutionary Toussaint Louverture was often called the Black Spartacus for his leadership of the slave rebellion that established Haiti as an independent nation. In the 19th century, Karl Marx identified Spartacus as one of history's great revolutionary figures. Praising his struggle against the Roman aristocracy, the 20th century saw Spartacus's story reach a global audience through Stanley Kubrick's 1960 film Spartacus, starring Kirk Douglas. Based on Howard Fass's novel, the film portrayed Spartacus as a champion of freedom and social justice, resonating with audiences during the Cold War era. The film's famous "I am Spartacus" scene, where captured rebels each claimed to be Spartacus. To protect him has become an iconic cultural reference for solidarity and resistance. In literature, authors from Arthur Koestler to Howard Fass to Colleen McCullough have explored different aspects of Spartacus's story, each bringing their own perspective to the historical record. These works have helped keep the memory of Spartacus alive, introducing new generations to this remarkable figure from antiquity. Influence on revolutionary movie EMNTS beyond cultural depictions. Spartacus's rebellion has had a tangible influence on revolutionary movements throughout history. His name has been invoked by countless groups fighting against oppression. From the German Spartacus League of the early 20th century to various anti-colonial and civil rights movements, what makes Spartacus's story so enduring for revolutionaries? Perhaps it's the fact that he represented the ultimate underdog or slave who challenged the mightiest empire of the ancient world and nearly succeeded. His tactical brilliance, his ability to unite diverse groups under a common cause, and his unwavering commitment to freedom have made him a symbol of resistance against overwhelming odds. During the American Civil War, both abolitionists and those fighting against slavery drew inspiration from Spartacus's struggle. More recently, the Arab Spring uprisings and other pro-democracy movements have looked to Spartacus as an example of how determined individuals can challenge seemingly invincible authoritarian regimes. The continuing resonance of his story speaks to the universal human desire for freedom and dignity, transcending time and culture. Comparisons with other slave revolts. While the Spartacus Rebellion was the largest slave uprising in the ancient world, it was by no means the only one. Throughout history, enslaved people have repeatedly risen up against their oppressors, often at tremendous cost. One of the most significant parallels can be found in the Haitian Revolution 1791 to 1804, which, like Spartacus's rebellion, began with a small group of escaped slaves and grew into a full-scale revolution that ultimately succeeded. In establishing an independent nation, both rebellions demonstrated the military potential of enslaved people when organized and motivated by the desire for freedom. The Nat Turner Rebellion in Virginia, 1831, shares similarities with Spartacus's uprising in its charismatic leadership and the brutal response it provoked from the ruling class. Like Spartacus, Turner was able to inspire followers to challenge the seemingly invincible institution of slavery. Though both rebellions ultimately ended in defeat for the rebels, more recently, the 1991 prison uprising in Attica, New York, though, on a much smaller scale, echoed some of the same themes of dignity and resistance against dehumanizing conditions that motivated Spartacus and his followers. What distinguishes the Spartacus rebellion from many of these later uprisings was its scale, duration, and military success. For 2 years, Spartacus's army controlled large parts of Italy, defeated multiple Roman armies, and posed a genuine threat to the Roman Republica. Feat unmatched by most other slave revolts in history, the historical enigma of Spartacus, despite his enduring fame, Spartacus remains something of an enigma. The historical sources are limited and often contradictory, written by Romans who viewed him as a threat to their way of life. As a result, much of what we think we know about Spartacus is filtered through the lens of his enemies. What were his ultimate goals? Did he truly intend to lead his followers to freedom beyond the Alps? Or did he harbor ambitions of striking at Rome itself? What kind of leader was he, personally merciful or cruel, pragmatic or ideological? These questions continue to divide historians and spark debate. What we do know is that Spartacus possessed extraordinary leadership abilities, military genius, and a charisma that enabled him to unite a diverse group of people under a common cause. He was able to maintain discipline and cohesion in an army that grew from 70 escaped gladiators to over 100,000 followers. A remarkable organizational achievement by any standard. Perhaps the most enduring mystery is what might have happened if Spartacus had succeeded, if his army had crossed the Alps and dispersed to their homelands, or if they had somehow managed to defeat Rome and establish a new social order. How might history have been different? These counterfactual questions remind us of the pivotal nature of the Spartacus rebellion, a moment when the course of history nearly took a dramatically different turn. The enduring legend why more than 2,000 years after his death, Spartacus continues to capture our imagination. His story speaks to universal themes of freedom, justice, and the human spirit's capacity to resist oppression. In an age when millions around the world still live in conditions of modern slavery and exploitation, the story of Spartacus remains as relevant as ever. What can we learn from the Spartacus rebellion today? Perhaps it's a reminder that even the most powerful systems of oppression are vulnerable to challenge. Maybe it's a testament to the power of unity across differences, as Spartacus managed to bring together people from diverse backgrounds under a common cause. Or perhaps it's simply the enduring appeal of an underdog story, the tale of a man who rose from the lowest rungs of society to challenge the mightiest empire of his time. As we reflect on the legacy of Spartacus, we might ask ourselves, what would we be willing to risk for freedom? What injustices in our own world demand the kind of courage and sacrifice that Spartacus and his followers displayed? These questions, like the story of Spartacus himself, continue to resonate across the centuries, challenging us to consider the values we hold most dear and the price we're willing to pay to defend them. The story of Spartacus is more than just a historical account of a failed rebellion. It's a testament to the enduring human desire for freedom and dignity, even in the face of overwhelming odds. From his humble beginnings as a gladiator in Capua to his leadership of an army that challenged Rome itself, Spartacus demonstrated the extraordinary potential of individuals to shape history. Even when starting from positions of apparent powerlessness, the rebellion he led ultimately failed, and the thousands of crosses lining the Appian Way stood as a brutal reminder of Rome's determination to maintain the social order. Yet the memory of Spartacus survived, inspiring countless generations to resist oppression and fight for justice. His name has become synonymous with the struggle for freedom, invoked by revolutionaries and reformers throughout history. As we look back on this remarkable episode from antiquity, we're reminded that history is not just the story of emperors and generals, but also of ordinary people who dared to dream of a better world and had the courage to fight for it. In the end, Perhaps that is Spartacus's greatest legacy, not the battles he won or the territory he controlled, but the enduring example of human dignity and the unquenchable desire for freedom that continues to inspire us today. The next time you hear the name Spartacus, remember not just the gladiator who rebelled against Rome, but the thousands of men and women who followed him, willing to risk everything for the chance to be free. Their story is a part of our shared human heritage, a reminder that even in the darkest of circumstances, the light of freedom can never be completely extinguished.